Well, here we are one more time. Figured I'd throw you guys another video. And this one here, we'll need to plow on into it because with the questions and the answers to the questions, I got quite a few slides. And my camera automatically cuts off after 30 minutes. There's not any setting I can do to change that. That's one of these videos. And I don't like having to splice them together and all that. I can do that, but I don't really enjoy doing it. So we're going to try to get through this pretty quick. To begin with, it's against the law to get paid to work on air conditioners if you don't have ESCO 609 certification. This is where you go to the website and you can get that certification fairly inexpensively. It's an open book test and it will teach you a lot about what you need to know. And if you get those credentials, then you're a whole lot better off if you happen to be working in a shop where somebody comes up and from the EPA, and you may not have ever heard about this happening, but if they wanted to, they could come and actually walk through these shops and they could find everybody doing air conditioner work. If the person doing the work doesn't have ESCO 609 certification, it's a $33,000 fine. So be aware of that. If you don't have it, it's not hard to get it, doesn't take you very long. Everybody needs to have it. There are other places. Max Mobile Air Conditioning Society offers a certification too. This one here will work. Okay, here was a Buick with an inoperative air conditioner. And this one here, she brought us this 1993 Buick, big old Park Avenue with all the bells and whistles on it, you know. You gotta love those whenever they get an air conditioner problem. AC was blowing nothing but hot wind and the clutch wasn't engaging. First thing I wanted to know was whether or not it had refrigerant in it, and if there was refrigerant, what kind was in there. This one here originally had R12 in it, and the high side port, one of those oddball, strange AC, old GM fittings like that required a special adapter. So I went ahead and got that. And this Neutronics refrigerant identifier cost about, well, the one that I bought initially was like $1,000. I don't know what they cost now, but that's what it looks like. And everybody that's going to be doing air conditioner work needs one, so you'll know what kind of gas is in there before you do a bunch of work. So this R12 system was fully loaded with R1234, but it still had the original fittings, which is sort of silly. I've seen that 2 or 3 times where somebody had doctored their gauges where they could put R134 in one that was valved for R12. This is a thing of the past. There's almost no vehicles out there anymore that still use R12 or have R12 fittings. Everybody's pretty much changed them over. Well, there was no stickers of any kind letting us know the car's refrigerator had been replaced, but whatever, you know. So anyway, so the processing center of that system is the HVAC programmer. GM likes to call their the control that gives you your automatic temperature control the HVAC programmer. Even back in the early 70s and whatnot, the Cadillacs and stuff had a great big old thing under the dash, and they called that a programmer. Nowadays the programmer's a lot smaller, I say nowadays they actually do it with different modules, but when they had an AC programmer, even in the late 90s and all, and on up into the early 2000s, it would be a smaller box. But one way or another, mounted behind a glove box is a simple CPU, receives electrical input signals from the heater and AC control assembly, and then it decides, you know, when the clutch needs to run and all that. It's like a little microprocessor that's just dedicated to AC. Okay, so it receives input from the passenger temperature control panel, 2 solar sensors, an ambient temperature sensor, in-car temperature sensor, blower control module, PCM, both driver and passenger air mix actuators. All of that stuff is in there. This sounds really complicated and like it's a dog that you wouldn't want to work on, right? Well, we plowed into it anyway. Now the CPU in the HVAC unit untangles all that, feeds these signals out for AC clutch operation. You see that? But you might notice the PCM at the end of the day is what tells the clutch to come on. Now there's your little diode there. And so the long and the short of it was, I got to looking through these schematics, you know. I said, well, the first place I like to go, you know, when I do that. So we don't want to bog down in all that. It's just that, let's just start simple. Let's wipe out all that stuff and let's just look at what's important. The compressor clutch relay is de-energized by the PCM when the engine is not running throttle's wide open, AC, the coolant's hotter than 250, or the AC is turned off. And we focused on the compressor because there was plenty of refrigerant pressure. The compressor wasn't running. So let's see what we can do with that. Okay, we pull the relay out and we get our test light and we connect the test light to hot, and then we go here and we want to see if that light burns. That ground coming through that coil should burn that test light. Okay, the problem turned in, I've shown you this picture before on that other, when I did the other day. It was from this vehicle, and this was such a good picture of messed up wires. You might remember having seen that picture. This is a vehicle that picture was originally taken on. This had been too close to the belt, and it had chopped that ground wire in two. And that was the deal. It was either the ground wire or this wire. I think it was that wire right there. Whatever it was, it actually had broken that circuit, and there was no power getting to the clutch. That's what the deal was on that. But anyway, so what we did was we fixed the wire, soldered, heat shrink, put loom on there, and we pulled it back and made sure that it was away from the belt. I don't know how that happened to begin with because we had never seen this vehicle before when it came to us with this problem, okay? All right, now whoever it was that had done the R12 to 134 conversion and hadn't gone to the trouble to get the right fittings, it wasn't that hard to do. You just screw that one out and screw that one in, right? Now, I don't know if you've seen this before, a lot of these GM cars, and pickup trucks particularly, when you're working on these systems, this silly fitting right here, after you've done all your work, suddenly that fitting's leaking, the R134 ones, and you can get those fittings from the parts store. And you screw it out of there, and you screw that other one back in, a little O-ring right there, and that's fairly easy to replace in case you ever have one that's leaking. Some people I've known at some places won't even hook their gauges up to that port, that big port, because they're afraid that it's going to start leaking, and so they just use the port for the low pressure side to pull the juice in there, and they never even hook up to the high pressure side. That's kind of a cop out. You need to know what those pressures are doing. All right. That's what we did. We made this one right. We put a fitting there. We put one there that's like it was supposed to be, and we got the cold air. Now, once in 1979, this guy that was working out there at the place where I was working in Texas, he came to me. He was he was a construction worker or something. I don't know what job he had. He had an old Chevrolet pickup, and he said my AC's not working, you know. And so I went over there and just horsing around with it. It didn't take but a second to take a piece of wire and bypass his low pressure cutout switch there on the accumulator, and the air conditioner kicked on. Everything got cold, started working real good, and I said. And I was just horsing around with him too. He says, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to have one of those things." I said, "Yeah, you need that switch there." And he says, "Okay, well, how much do I owe you?" I said, $65. He goes, $65? All you did was jump a wire. Well, you've heard that. All I knew which wire to jump. I didn't charge him $65. I just made him think I was going to charge him $65. Anyway, this other Lincoln, this was the one right here. The customer comes in, they tell me when I hit a bump, the blower comes on high. No matter what setting he had the blower on, when he hit a bump, it would start blowing on high blow. And so I was at the Ford place then, and I brought that thing into my service bay, and I drove it actually first, and I felt it do that. I hit a bump and it blew. And it started blowing hard, and switch it off, crank it back up, it's blowing normally. So I pulled it into my service bay, and I got a long extension and use it like a pool cue and just kind of bump that blower controller there under the hood there on the evaporator housing. And as soon as I just bumped that electronic blower controller, because it had automatic temperature control, you know, the stupid thing kicked on the high blow. I said, well, you know, what are you supposed to think? You bump the thing with your, and it kicks on the high blow. I said, well, that's bound to be one of those things. So I sent up to the Lincoln dealership, which was a different one at the time, and $100 later, we had a blower controller in there, and it was doing the same thing. Bump, and it starts blowing high blow. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? Well, I got to investigating this thing, and I found that there was coming out of there was a relay in that controller that was supposed to close and give you high blow. Well, the wire that was coming from the control head that went in there to energize that relay when you turned it on high was leaking 8 volts. 8 volts was leaking out of that control head, and it was enough to create magnetism in that coil. But when you bumped it or it hit a little vibration, it would snap those contacts shut, and then it would start blowing on high. And it wouldn't release it until you switched it off and killed all the power. And when you cranked it back up, you're back where you were. And so this is what I decided to do with that. You know the little gauge tester with the 3 potentiometers in there? I pulled the control head out and I took the top off of it. You know, sort of thinking, well, what have I got to lose? This guy's going to have a control head anyway if we fix it like we're supposed to. And so I used that little gauge tester and I hooked it up to that circuit. And I dialed in some resistance that would bleed off that 8 volts, but it would still allow the control head to turn the blower on high when it needed to. And whenever I figured out what that resistance was, dialing those little potentiometers, I went ahead and did a measurement on that. It was 150 ohms, as I remember. So whenever I put that 150 ohm resistor in there and it shunted that 8 volts to ground, which is what I had basically done with my little gauge tester, the car was fixed. And so I said, all right, that's pretty cool. And anyway, don't try that at home. I got lucky on that one, but you usually can't get away with stuff like that, you know. All right, little 83 Diesel Rabbit right here. These little VW Rabbits could have some good AC, but when the compressor kicked on, it felt like you'd lost about half your horsepower. I drove one of those for a long time, and that thing was got 55 miles to the gallon. Love that little car. And I had worked at the Volkswagen dealer, so I knew how to work on these, and I knew how they were wired up and all that kind of thing. But the point is, they've got a little shift, upshift light that tells you when you're supposed to shift to the next gear. And in order to make that work, there's 2 switches here on the throttle. And there's one there and there's one there. And there's one of them to let off, and there's one to, you know, in other words, there's a wide open throttle switch, and there's one that tells it when you're in idle. And so that says, but when you're between those two, if you were at wide open throttle, it wouldn't ever turn on the shift light. But if you were between those two and you get a certain RPM, it's time to shift. So I'm going to use that little sucker right there, the one for wide open throttle, this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and wire that up so that whenever I added a relay. Now I drew this circuit myself using paint on Microsoft. I do that sometimes. I draw stuff on paint. But anyway, the compressor clutch, I wired it between the compressor clutch and the V plus controls, which the power that was going to the compressor clutch would come from there. And this one here fired up the coil, and I would use the ground from the 70% throttle switch, which I call it the wide open throttle switch. If I was at 70% throttle, it would drop the AC compressor, which is like a wide open throttle cutout relay, you know, like the Fords used to have on them. But that helped me so much when I was getting ready to pass a car. If the air conditioner was on and you went into that past 70% throttle and gained some speed, it would drop the compressor out, and then you had, you know, the little bit extra power you needed. And there was a way you could do the valves and the fuel injector pump and all to give those things more speed and power, which I did that on another one I had that I was playing around with. There's a story I could tell you about that. Or back in the 80s, I was going through this little speed trap town and figured I was home free, you know, so I hammered down on that thing. This little gray 78 Diesel Rabbit I had horsed around with the injector pump, the valve adjustment, all that kind of thing, give us more power. And I don't know how fast I was going. I just said, I'm not going to the house. I've already passed through speed trap town. So anyway, I saw the long way behind me, this, you know, I said, oh, brother. You know, and I don't know how fast. Like I say, I wasn't even looking at the speedometer. I was just driving that little sucker, and boy, would it fly. And it was a diesel. And so I pulled over real fast, and the cop pulls up, and he said, I had you at 69 when I met you, when you were rounding the curve going up the bridge there. But I've since disconnected, killed that reading, and he was trying to get me at the higher speed, but he didn't manage to. And so we were sitting there talking about it. And he said, I don't know how fast you were going, but he says, I have my Mustang, and that's what he was driving, a Mustang cop car. My Mustang was on 130, and I wasn't gaining on you any. And I'm thinking, I said, give me a break, man. I'm driving a Diesel Rabbit. You think I'm going 130 miles an hour? You know, come on. Anyway, I think that ticket was $51, and that was back in the 80s. like 1984 or something. Anyway, knock on wood, I hadn't had a ticket in a long time. That one. Anyway, one way or another, this Cherokee, Ed, this is Ed, he said the AC would cool just fine in the morning, but as the day wore on, there was times when the air coming from the registers would warm up to where it wasn't cool. All right, you're gonna see one sooner or later. I had to feel the frosty air with an ambient temperature near about 85 degrees. The unit was blowing. I didn't even connect the gauges. I said, it's blowing cold. We know you got good juice in there, right? Now, there are times when you need to hook it up. There was a lady that had a Ford Edge, the 2012 model, and hers was actually, it would start cooling. It would, after about 30 minutes, it would quit cooling. And so I ran that one and watched the gauges and found out it had a bad expansion valve on that one. Now that's, you know, it's always a good idea to hook the gauges up. I didn't hook it up on this one because I had an idea there wasn't nothing wrong with the refrigerant charge. So I checked the fan and the fan relay. It was just fine. Okay, so the system's simple and direct. It's got a PCM controlling the AC clutch and the secondary engine coolant fan through a pair of relays. And these relays, you might see they're wired in series and all that. There's AC switch sense comes right through all of those, right? Okay, so 4-liter package has a water pump driven fan and an electric fan to assist in cooling if the AC head pressure goes too high and the engine gets too hot. And this is 2 switches in one. All right, one of them requests the fan, and the other one, basically, you see it's a ganged switch is operating at the same time. And so, if the low pressure switch is tripped, it opens the PCM, kills the compressor. If the high pressure switch is tripped, the fan is requested and the AC compressor is deactivated, so on and so forth. So as the compressor cycled, we watched it change state several times. I was hooked into this little low pressure cutout switch, and I got that thing fixed where I wouldn't mess up the terminal. I was down in there where I could measure it with my meter. So I could tell that the switch was working. You can also grab that switch in your fingers and feel it click if you've got sensitive fingers on that. But anyway, it didn't cycle back on one time when it cycled off. And so I got under the relay right here with my test light, and I noticed there was power leaving the relay going to the compressor clutch, but the compressor clutch wasn't energized. Alright, and so what would you do? What you do there is you bump the clutch. Now you need to be bumping it in the direction it spins, so don't bump it so that when it kicks in it throws your screwdriver back and it goes through your eyeball. You need to be really careful how you do this because it can be down and dangerous. And if the compressor is just really hard to get to, it's going to be difficult to do this safely. But you need to do it with something in such a way, or if it's turning clockwise, you need to bump it so that it'll be going away from whatever you bumped it with, not going toward it, you know. Anyway, this one here, when I bumped it, it went in, the air gap needed to be adjusted. As that thing wears, the air gap, you know, gets a little too wide, so you need to set it, usually you can look up your air gap spec, it's usually about 20 thousandths or something like that, you know. And if the air gap doesn't meet the spec, add or subtract shims as required. It says 16 to 31 thousandths of an inch, or 410 to 780 millimeters. All right, let's look at this one here. Question A says, Technician A says, many of today's modern automotive AC units use a thermistor in the evaporator to prevent evaporator icing. Technician B says refrigerant pressure is directly related to refrigerant temperature. Who's correct about that? Which one of these would not cause the evaporator to freeze up? Stuck closed relay, stuck closed low pressure cutout switch, bad coolant fan relay, a compressor that won't shut off. Technician A says the compressor will cycle more often with the blower on low. Technician B says the vehicle will actually get better fuel economy on a long trip with the AC on max or recirc than it will on norm. Who's correct about that? On a vehicle where the AC is blowing warm air, but the compressor is running normally, the gauges are showing these readings, and the suction line is cold all the way to the compressor. What's the most likely cause of the problem? When your suction line is cold all the way to the compressor, but you're reading, you're reading up there close to 225, and up there, and this is on a warm day, right? But you're actually not feeling any cold air coming out of your register. AC's not cooling, compressor's running, suction line not cold. What's the most likely cause of these readings? Fully charged system. compressor running, AC not cooling. What's the most likely concern with this one? I hope when I did these answers I didn't get these mixed up. We'll see. Compressor running, AC starts out cooling well, then stops cooling. Compressor belt starts squealing, or compressor clutch starts slipping. What's the most likely cause of that? Alright, what liquid state in each hose? Now I got these hoses color coded. This is B, this is A, this one right here is C, and D is that little place right there, and then E would be up here. You see your choices here. Name these hoses and pipes. Same picture. Now I need to know what the hoses and pipes are. What do you call them? Number 10, blower doesn't work on high. What's it liable to be here? You only got these 4 choices. Faulty blower motor relay, bad ground G200, bad blower motor, or bad HVAC control module. Now let's grade the test. Technician A says, many of all, both these guys are right. As a matter of fact, most of them nowadays have got an evaporator temperature thermistor to keep it from freezing up. And refrigerant pressure is directly related to refrigerant temperature. It's not, necessarily pound per degree, but it's really close. And when you've got a high pressure, you'll have high temperature with refrigerant. Low pressure means low temperature. This wouldn't cause the evaporator to freeze up. Bad coolant fan relay would not cause the evaporator to freeze up. Okay, so what's the bad coolant fan relay going to do? It's going to cause the head pressure to go up. That's not going to freeze the evaporator up. That's going to make everything get hotter, if anything. This one here, if it's running all the time, it'll freeze it up. A stuck closed low pressure cutout switch, that'll freeze it up. A stuck closed AC clutch relay, that'll freeze it up. Compressor will cycle more often with the blower on low. That's true. If you got the thing on recirc or max, the compressor's not going to run as much because it's air conditioning the inside air, so you technically will get better fuel economy running max than you will norm air. Alright, this is going to be a heater blend door issue. And one of the things we used to do is make sure that we're on the right heater pipe. And whenever if you're on the right heater pipe, you can actually close off your coolant going through the heater core. And see, even on the ones that have a heater control valve, whenever they close off, it actually is still circulating through the heater control valve. It's just not going to the heater core. But anyway, if you can keep that heater, that coolant from going to that heater core on the one going to the, if you pinch the one coming from the heater core, you may bust the heater core. So be aware of that. Don't pinch the wrong one, okay? Pinch the one going to it, but you got to know which is which. And don't guess at it. Okay, AC not cooling, compressor running, suction line not cold. This is high, that's low, it's a bad compressor. Just about every time. You see this a lot on those little scroll type compressors. They like to crap out. Fully charged system, compressor running, AC not cooling. Both sides are low, that's a bad expansion valve or a clogged orifice. One time we saw this on a Toyota, put an expansion valve on it, it didn't fix it. It turned out that one had to have an evaporator. And I don't really understand that because you could actually blow air through that evaporator. But when we put an evaporator on it, after having replaced the expansion valve, we put an evaporator on it and took care of the whole problem. The pressure's normalized, it got started cooling. There's sometimes you'll have a mystery that you got to solve. Compressor running, AC starts out cooling well, but then stops cooling. That's an inoperative condenser fan. As the pressure gets higher and higher and higher, sometimes you'll actually have one that's got a fan clutch on it. We ran into one of those. I've got a video on my YouTube channel about a Nissan pickup truck that was squalling a belt, and and when I put a fan in front of the condenser blowing from a shop fan, the pressure is normalized and it never squealed a belt. And we wound up putting a fan clutch on that one and took care of that problem. Okay, so this right here is going to have low pressure gas. That's your suction line right there, right? And it's coming this way. Alright, B is going to be high pressure liquid. That red is actually traveling in this direction. Alright, C is going to be your high pressure gas, and that's going to be the discharge line coming out of there and going to the condenser. So this is going in here, coming out there, and then coming back over here. and then D is going to be that little place right there where you got low pressure liquid, which is getting ready to evaporate. Suction line, liquid line, discharge line, evaporator inlet, and heater hoses. Heater hoses up there. That is a cold engine lockout switch on some of your older Fords is what that is. Alright, blower doesn't work right, faulty blower motor relay. Now if that fuse is blown, you'll have the same situation. If that fuse is blown, it will not have anything to give that motor, even if that relay closes. And I used to plant a bug on some of the Chevy pickups I had over there by putting a bad fuse right here. And one of the crazy things is if they weren't real familiar, you had to be able to read a schematic and think and reason and all that kind of stuff. And if you can't trace the wiring schematic, you got some issues. You got big trouble there. So anyway, that winds that thing up right there. I hope you got some good out of that. One of the things that I like to do, I'm going to finish this up with a story because I got about 4 minutes left before this thing cuts off on me. Lady come with a 2010 Altima. She said, I went to the shop up there in the other part of town, and they told me, he said my AC was working fine, it just quit working all of a sudden. And this kid come out there with a flashlight looking around. He goes, well, I don't know what's wrong with it. It's probably going to be $1,000. What? Anyway, so she brings it over there. I got a test light and hooked it hot, and I found the wire going down to the AC compressor clutch, and I went into that wire. I was going to see if it had power going to the clutch, but I didn't get a ground there. And what that told me, that the compressor clutch coil was burned out. And so we put our compressor on there, and on that particular car, the labor time was like 8/10 of an hour to replace the compressor. The whole job, if you squeezed it really hard, you might get the price of the compressor plus $100 out of it or something. I don't know where that $1,000 came from. Well, the crazy thing about it was probably the next day, a different car from a different town was a Nissan Altima, same year model and everything. And she said, my compressor quit. I mean, not my compressor, my AC quit cooling on mine. I went over to this little shop over in such and such a town, and they told me I needed a compressor. It was going to be $1,000. I said, $1,000, another $1,000. And so she said, and it has exactly the same problem as the first Nissan, and like within 2 days of each other. Strange how those jobs come in like that. Well, I said, did you ask them why it was so high? She says, yeah. I asked them why it was so much money, and they said that it was about 7 or 8 hours worth of labor, which was nonsense because it was like, in the labor guide, it was like less than an hour of labor because the compressor clutch was real easy to get to on that car. Anyway, it's just, but I understand, shops have got overhead, but a lot of shops don't even pay attention to a labor guide. They just charge whatever the market will bear, and you can charge a fair price, and most customers don't mind paying if the car is fixed. But I don't know at the times I've seen people like my aunt went in a place over here in town just with her old Crown Victoria, and they told her it needed $700 or $800 worth of front end work, and the front end was about to fall out from under it and all that. She brought it down there where I was, and I raised it up on the lift and looked. I didn't even see any busted boots or anything else, or didn't understand why they were making those great big price and all this stuff needs to be done, and your tie rod ends are coming apart, and your ball joints are going to kill you, and all this kind of stuff. If it had busted boots, I could have kind of understood them saying that, but this one didn't have busted boots or anything. So anyway, I'm not trying to trash talk anybody, but fair is fair. If somebody needs a job done, they need it done. If they don't need it done, it's just a whole lot better to be honest and say, I could do this, but you can do without it for a while. Unless it's something safety related, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and come back to see me.